Hello, I am Melly Rentas, and in today's video, I'm going to be sharing with you my personal story of having a second trimester miscarriage. Before we go on, if you would like to, feel free to subscribe to my channel. I share mental health content from a Christian and biblical perspective, specifically for women. So if that sounds like something you would like to learn about and receive encouragement on, I try to post as often as I'm able to. So it just so happens that May was Maternal Mental Health Awareness Month, and I ended up taking the entire month of May off from posting anything on social media. I usually post the most on Instagram, just like educational content, encouragement, etc. But I'm going to share, as I mentioned, my personal story. So in February of 2024, I had found out that I was pregnant. My family and I, we were super excited. My husband and I had been trying for 2 years to get pregnant. We didn't really want any medical intervention or anything like that. I just kind of thought that since I was getting older, I turned 40 this year in September of 2024, I just thought getting older, that's probably part of it. We didn't have any issues at all getting pregnant with our two sons, who are now 7 and 9. It was pretty much, I knew when I was ovulating and we got pregnant right away. So that was a blessing and a gift, but I never experienced any miscarriages or any loss at all whatsoever in terms of, personal infant loss. Whoops. So I hadn't ever experienced any personal infant loss at all whatsoever until this year. To kind of make a long story short, genuinely, I essentially found out I was pregnant in February. I went to a private ultrasound company locally to confirm the pregnancy because I was so excited and totally in shock. And so I did that at around 8 weeks and everything seems fine, but the baby was super teeny tiny. I had a hard time finding a doctor because I relocated from one part of the state to another, and a lot of the hospitals are sort of further away, and I was between midwife or OBGYN. Eventually, I decided to see an OBGYN. To give a little context and backstory, there were 2 times that I remember really feeling in my spirit that maybe something was wrong. And at first, I remember telling myself, I distinctly remember I went to the bathroom. It was normal. There was no bleeding. I had no issues. But as I was walking out, something in my spirit told me something's wrong. And I'm a very rational person, as you know. As I mentioned, I'm a therapist. And also being a Christian, I try to, tell or ask myself, okay, is this absolutely true before I make myself anxious about something? Like, is it factual? And I remember telling myself, well, I don't know that anything's wrong. It could be just like typical second trimester anxiety where you're not nauseous anymore, you're not feeling any symptoms, the baby's too small to really feel the baby moving. So you have those moments of like, is everything okay in there? And you know how our minds work. Like, we have these thoughts in like a split second, right? So I thought that, and then within another second, I thought, with my 2 other pregnancies, I never felt that sense of something is wrong. So that's part of the drive of wanting to see an OBGYN, and I literally had to be on the phone for like 3 hours, calling back and forth, trying to find doctors that deliver at a hospital close by, because we live way out of the city in a rural part of Tampa, and essentially being new to the area, not really knowing a lot of people or anything like that, it was hard to find a doctor. So case in point, I went to a doctor at 15 weeks gestation, and that was the day that we found out that there was no heartbeat. And if you're watching this and you've gone through this too, you know how devastating that is. For me, in my story, I was just kind of like, I just had this feeling that something was wrong, as I mentioned before. And there was another time where I would touch the bottom part of my tummy and it was painful. And I've never experienced that before. It was not like the round ligament pain that's typical of pregnancy. it was like a tenderness. And I know now that it was because the baby was gone and probably breaking down in my uterus. And if you're wondering, like, how am I able to even share any of this without crying, it's because it's been over a month at this point. And not just that, I know that a lot of it is God's goodness and grace, prayers of family and friends, and just really being intentional about my thought life and surrendering and trusting God and really choosing to live out that faith intentionally, like for real, each and every day. And so I want to make sure that I mention that, because that's like such a huge part of it, you know. But to go on with the story, so we went to the doctor May 1st. That was my first appointment. I was told that there was no heartbeat. It was so crazy because we were excited. You know, I still had I had that fear of like, could something be wrong? And also still the like, sometimes this doesn't feel real because it took so long to get pregnant. So it's just lots of confusion, right? And so when we went to the doctor, we went straight in to see the sonographer because, you know, people were busy and we just saw the sonographer first. And I remember asking, would we be able to see, you know, figure out the sex today, the gender of the baby? And she said, oh yeah, if you're 15 weeks, for sure, you know. So she was kind of like chipper and excited as we were. And then all of a sudden her demeanor really seemed to change. And she didn't really say anything, but I could sense it. You know what I mean? I just remember thinking that she seemed cold. And I remember when she put the wand and I could see the baby, I was like, oh, you know, there's the baby, you know, it just makes it real and it's exciting. But sensing the shift in her like tone and in the interaction, I just had like that feeling in my heart again of like, is something wrong? You know, because I noticed that she right away was measuring the head, and I said, oh, is that the head? And she's like, yeah. She was just like, or she said yes. But wasn't saying anything else. And I just had that feeling, you know, like if you've been there and you've had that feeling, you know what that feels like, I guess, right? And sometimes our intuition can be wrong. I don't want to make it seem like I knew. I really didn't know. I had that feeling, but I mean, obviously I was hoping for the best, right? But and hindsight being 2020, like this is me sharing after the fact everything that happened. So with that being said, remember she told us that there was no heartbeat. She said, I'm so sorry, there's no heartbeat. My husband, for sure, thank God that he was there. I forgot to mention he was with me. We homeschool our boys, and where we live, family's pretty far from us, so we had to bring them with us. They were waiting, thankfully, in the waiting room with their Nintendo Switches, and I packed snacks and I packed, because they said it was going to be a 3-hour appointment because it was my first one. It didn't end up being that long, but anyway, they had some stuff to keep them busy, and my husband was going to go out, you know, every like 30 minutes just to check on them. But so when she told me that, honestly, I was in shock, but I also was not surprised. My husband was in total shock, and I started getting like a stomach ache. I remembered that just now, and had to go to the bathroom a few times, probably from the stress of it all. But even before they told me, my tummy was like not doing well. It was like gassy and in pain and all that. So they moved us to another room. Actually, the sonographer said that she didn't have a heartbeat. The doctor was going to come in to confirm. The doctor came in, confirmed that there was no heartbeat, and then they moved us to another room. And that's when really hit me by the time I was talking about it with my husband and sharing with him, you know, those moments that I had where I thought something was wrong. And he was like, did you not tell me to not like scare me? And I said, no, I think I just kind of thought it and then kind of brushed it off. Like, I'm not gonna, you know, that's just the way my mind works. Like I've come a long way. I used to be a very anxious kid and young adult, and now, by the grace of God, right, I don't tend to make myself very anxious anymore. So it was like a passing thought, but, you know, surrendered, gave it to God, prayed about it in the moment, and didn't think twice about it until we were there being told that the baby was gone, right? So it really hit me and really sunk in when I thought about the fact that I was going to have to tell my sons who were in the waiting room. And it was really heartbreaking because just to add, right, to the heartbreak, my oldest one, who's 9, he loves kids. Since he was a toddler, I remember feeling that mommy guilt of like, he needs a sibling because he's so sociable and he's so good with kids, and he has been asking for a baby sister for the longest time. Not that we could control that, right? But, he had just had that in his heart of really wanting a sibling. And so and he's also like kind of sensitive in some ways. And so when it hit me that I was going to have to tell both of them, but especially the older one, I was just like, oh, that's when it really hit. And when I started to break down and cry. So thankfully, I didn't have to wait very long to have the surgeries. The doctor did mention essentially that the best option would be to have a surgery because the baby's heart stopped at around 13 weeks. So I guess that's what they were doing when they measured the head, I suppose, right? Measuring the size of the baby. So I was 15 weeks pregnant, or at least I thought I was, and the baby was measuring 13. So that means, if I'm not mistaken, I had a miscarriage. So I had no bleeding. I had really no symptoms aside from that tenderness in the bottom of my tummy, in the bottom part of my tummy. And so I was going to have to go into surgery, and I asked, and I remember they said, do you want to go, because it was Wednesday, do you want to go on Friday? And I said, the sooner the better, because I just knew mentally it would be difficult to manage the reality and sleep at night knowing that your baby's dead inside of you. And I apologize if this sounds heartbreaking, but I mean, it's true. And if you're going through this, I know how hard this is. So, and I've seen in the mommy forums, the miscarriage forums, people talking about how some of them have had to wait like a week to have their surgery. So I had what's called a D&E since I was in my second trimester. It's, dialysis and evacuation, where they have to clear everything out. And it was just so hard because I was like, are you sure? The whole denial part with grief and all of that. And I knew that it was real, but I still had to ask, like, are you sure? And it was just so intense dealing with that, we waited till we got home to tell the boys. Our appointment ended, pretty abruptly. Sorry if I'm all over the place, but they were able to schedule me the following day at the hospital to have the surgery. And so that night I did not sleep really at all. I tried, I prayed, and just sometimes your mind, especially in those kinds of really intense, very stressful moments, it's hard to sleep, So I just accepted the reality that I was going to have a rough night, but thankfully, everything would be resolved in the morning. And if you know me, but I know you probably don't know me. I've always been the kind of person, even as a little kid at age 5. I remember the first time I ever fainted after getting a vaccine. I've just always been a fainter, the kind of person that gets dizzy and lightheaded at hospitals. I have to be very aware of my thoughts and my breathing and all of that. It's one of those places where I make myself very anxious with just all the medical things. And so knowing that I was going to have to go get a surgery was a very overwhelming thought for me, but I know that God really spoke to me in his own special way and just kind of, I want to say, revealed to me one step at a time, and I know this obviously with anxiety, the more we try to fast forward and think all the way ahead and the surgery and this, that, and the other and what they're doing, the more anxious and miserable I would make myself. So I just wanted to focus, okay, one step at a time. Right now, I remember being in the car and telling my husband, telling myself, right now, I just have to get down, go and check in at the hospital. So that's what I did. And then I remember telling myself, okay, right now I just have to sit here and wait for the nurse to check me in. And then going into the operating waiting room area, the pre-op area, I remember telling myself, breathe deeply. Right now, I just have to focus on walking with the nurse to whatever area she's telling me to go to, She gave me wipes to wipe down and all of that. And I remember telling myself, okay, right now I'm going to wipe and do this and all the things that she told me to do. And that really helped with keeping myself calm, and prayer as well, right? The one time that I did break down is when they gave me the IV in this hand. That's why I was looking at it. They did the IV in this hand and, needles for me. I just started crying because it hurt so much. And she was so sweet. She said, "Do you need a hug?" And I said, "Yes." And I was just crying. And it was more so thinking, I remember, wow, that really hurt. And I think something like, I wish I didn't have to be here or go through this. And that's any kind of time, any moment, any kind of thought where we tell ourselves like, I wish or I shouldn't have to be going through this. The fruit of that is the anxiety, the anger, the resentment, the bitterness, because it's kind of like essentially not accepting reality. You know what I mean? And I know that to be true. And even though I felt that, I remember thinking to myself like, okay, I don't want to make myself miserable right now. Like if I wanted to cry, okay, so be it. Like there's a time to cry. Like the Bible says, there's a time to laugh, a time to cry. But I just didn't want to be so overwhelmed like that. So taking a deep breath helps, and reminding myself like I have to accept this reality, and just praying and asking God to give me that peace that passes all understanding, right? When it doesn't make sense. So with all that being said, I had the surgery. Everyone was amazing at the hospital. Can't complain. The nurses, the anesthesiologists, they listened to all the things that I mentioned, things I was worried about, referenced nausea. They gave me, meds for that. They suggested like not doing the gas, so that I wouldn't wake up nauseous. I think it was gas, or I don't remember. I'm not a medical doctor, so I don't know all those things. But I do remember being wheeled into the operating room and just feeling that peace of God really overcoming me and keeping me calm. And they did give me medicine too right before I went into the operating room, so I'm sure that helped. Thankful for that, not gonna lie. And then it's so funny because I remember like, I guess they were moving me from that bed where they wheel you into the operating room to the table where there's like lights and all of that. And I just kind of blacked out like super calmly. It didn't even feel like I fell asleep. It felt like I just blacked out, because I remember being completely awake and lucid and paying attention and noting these big old lights, and then just being out of it. But then I woke up and I felt completely fine. No nausea. There was another nurse there. They had like that blanket over me that is like a heated blanket, which was nice and warm and cozy. And I just woke up at peace. Once I was lucid enough to have a conversation with the nurse, they brought my husband over, and essentially, eventually they wheelchaired me out and went home. That first night was pretty painful physically and emotionally because of the cramping, bleeding, just kind of processing everything, thinking about how you're not pregnant anymore and the baby's gone and all of that. It's a hard thing to go through, hard to accept and reconcile. You were pregnant and now you're not. And if you're watching this and you're overwhelmed with sadness and all of that, I totally understand. And I would encourage you to allow yourself to feel that. Allow yourself to cry. Allow yourself to grieve. Allow yourself to process it. Because I know that when we try to stuff it all in and not experience it and try to pretend it's not there, it didn't happen, we make ourselves much worse. So with that being said, I guess the last thing I'll share, since it's kind of, this whole video is like my story, I wanted to add that it was also very hard to experience the pain in my breasts, and it felt like maybe my breast thought I had given birth, and it felt similar to when I was creating milk after giving birth to my 2 sons. And it was just, they felt really engorged. And I remember thinking, oh my God, please, I don't want to get mastitis, which is like an infection in your ducts in your breasts. when I don't even have the baby, and so many things. So thankfully that did not happen. I was like massaging and praying and then taking warm showers, massaging, and just making sure everything, I guess, was flowing. I mean, I don't know. Nothing came out. I just meant like the massaging and the warm shower tends to help when you have mastitis or any of that discomfort when you're breastfeeding. So I did that, but just like mentally it was difficult to reconcile those two things. But I knew that reading the mommy forums was going to be helpful. Like allowing myself to accept reality was going to be huge. I know that in working with clients, in any kind of grief situation, or trauma situation, like accepting reality, sharing your story. And the more you talk about it, actually, the better that you feel. So I texted all my friends. I'm looking at my notes here. One of my good friends sent me a journal and a book that was like a devotional, and just allowing myself to cry and feel and read and write and do all of it was really helpful. Even rituals for closure, like if you're able to get ashes for the baby, I was able to do that. And we haven't decided yet if we want to spread the ashes in the ocean or take it with us to whatever house we move to next, because right now we're renting. I'm just trying to pray for that, because I know that I can get really attached if I spread the ashes in our yard and then we decide we want to move. Like, that would be really hard. So I'm leaning towards that. We just haven't done it yet. For various reasons. But another nice thing that some people do is you can get jewelry. So our baby was going to be due in October, and I don't have it on now, but I bought a bracelet that has the October birthstone. We were not able to find out the sex of the baby or anything like that, so it's probably for the better. There's to be a reason for that. So just the birthstone is a nice thing to have in a necklace or a bracelet. I know some people get the ashes and will make jewelry with it too. I'm not so sure if I want to do that yet. I'm still trying to decide and praying about it. So I did want to finish this video. I know it's kind of long, but if you're going through something like this, hearing someone talk about it and their experience and from a faithful and positive perspective can be beneficial, because I know when I was searching for this, I was hesitant to really watch anything on YouTube because most people don't have that, right? They don't have an encouragement to share. So I wanted to share some encouragement here at the end. Just 3 of the things that helped me the most in coping with this grief, this loss. The first thing was faith. I'm so thankful for the gift of faith that God has given me, to know that, death has lost its sting, that even when bad things happen, God can work all things together for good. And having that hope gives me so much gratitude, because I don't despair. I don't feel hopeless. I know and believe that that baby is in heaven with Jesus. And I remember one morning after the surgery, really when I was sad and angry and all the things, because it was that, I don't want to make it seem like I wasn't. I was angry and I was sad and I was questioning, and remember asking God, like, why? I just don't understand, and I just had this picture in my mind of like the baby in heaven with Jesus, and I don't know how old we are when we go to heaven. I've read heaven books, and I don't know if we go to heaven as if you die as a baby, if you actually go to heaven as a baby. But in my mind, I pictured the baby kind of like as a 5-year-old or a 4-year-old in heaven with Jesus, like running up to Jesus and giving him a hug. And that just gave me this peace that passes all understanding. That it was everything that I needed to see in that moment. And I remember thinking, like, my grandmother's up there in heaven with this baby, and my other, my grandpa, her husband passed away. My other grandparents are still here, are with him in heaven, and like all the generations, my husband's grandparents that have passed. Recently, his uncle passed. Like, they're all up there in heaven together, And there's a couple verses that really give me encouragement, and I pray that they give you encouragement too. There's one that says, to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. And that's a beautiful thing, because we all know this earth, this time, this age, like, it's so broken and so difficult. And to be in paradise, like Jesus told the person in the cross next to him, right? Like, today you will be in paradise. Like, to be in total and complete paradise with Christ is such an encouragement. And then the next Bible verse was, blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. And it's so true. I could feel the comfort of God in those moments where I was just overwhelmed with grief or anger or sadness, whatever it was. And that kind of like trickles into the second thing that I found really helpful, which was community. I was very sort of quick to share what happened with friends and family over text, because I really just did not want to call people on the phone, obviously, and tell everyone, or tell people in person from church or homeschool groups or any of that stuff. So I texted, and just receiving their messages of encouragement. Some of them, sent letters in the mail with Bible verses. It spoke to my heart and really was so healing for me. And I know that, based off of what I've studied with like trauma and grief, like it's so important to share and to have community, to have people pray with you, and to like accept that reality. Like, this is part of it, right? And talking with my spouse, there were times where, I was just overcome with sadness, and he was here, and I would just be like, I need a hug, and he'd give me a hug, and we would just hold each other for like a few seconds, and you can feel like that calm come over you, and they say that when you hug people, you get oxytocin, right? It's like that bonding attachment hormone. And it's very soothing, especially when you're sad and when you're grieved. So talking with people, hugging your spouse, hugging your kids, hugging whoever, your friends, whoever it is that you have, and speaking with other moms who've gone through the same thing. That way you recognize that, like, A, you're not alone, and B, this is such a huge part of, what we're told when we miscarry. It's like, it's not really anything you did that caused this miscarriage. I think the doctor told me either 20 to 25% of all pregnancies end in miscarriage. And it's so devastating to know that that's true, but it is, Genesis 3, the earth is cursed and everything in it. Like, these things are going to happen. That's just the reality. So having that community of prayer, having those people that you can count on and talk to and just hug and get that encouragement and process that grief with is going to be so important. And also to see how they're doing too. Like, I wanted to be able to minister to my kids because they're older, 7 and 9, and see how they're doing with it and how they're processing it and how it's challenging like their mindset and their faith, right? Because that happens with death oftentimes. All right. And so the third and final thing that I wanted to share was finding a cause. So you can see my shirt here says M.E.N.D, Mommies Enduring Neonatal Death. This is in miles. So I found this resource online as I was trying to find something to do, trying to find virtual groups and things like that. And it just so happens this is a Christian ministry that serves women who have either had a miscarriage or stillbirth or infant death. And it's an incredible resource. It just so happens that when I found them online, they had their virtual 5K. So I bought the shirt right away, did the whole thing. I walked the 5K, in my neighborhood, and it gave me a sense of purpose and a sense of attachment, a sense of like being able to connect this trauma, right, with meaning, and being able to donate and give to a ministry that has free virtual groups for mamas who want to have that connection is such a blessing. So I will leave their link in the description of this video, wherever you're watching, so you can check that out. So with that being said, those are the 3 encouragements that I have for you. If you're going through a miscarriage, I pray that you find them helpful. And I just wanted to keep this video as raw and real and honest as possible based off of my experience and what's helped me. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comment section and I will get back to you.